3 days after burying my father, I was sitting in a hospital recovery chair after losing my baby when my stepbrother walked in, slammed a legal document on the table, and told me I had 10 minutes to give up my inheritance or walk away with nothing. When I refused, he slapped me so hard the entire waiting room went silent, and then left me there like I didn't matter. What he didn't know was that the same week I discovered two things he never expected me to see: a toxicology report showing my father's medication levels were dangerously high the night he died, and nearly $800,000 quietly disappearing from the company he thought he had already stolen. My name is Elena Whitaker, and what started as the worst week of my life slowly turned into the moment that destroyed everything he thought he controlled. Chapter 1. The morning everything changed. My name is Elena Whitaker. I am 34 years old, a civil architect living in Charlotte, North Carolina. 3 days before this morning began, I buried my father. Daniel Whitaker spent more than 20 years building Whitaker Infrastructure into a respected regional construction company. Roads, small bridges, municipal contracts across North Carolina quietly carried his name in the blueprints. He never chased attention. He believed the best work was the kind people depended on without ever thinking about who built it. The doctors said he died from sudden cardiac arrest. I was still trying to accept that when everything else started to fall apart. The morning it began, I was sitting in a recovery chair at a women's health clinic in Raleigh. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee drifting from the hallway. Sunlight slipped through the blinds and stretched across the floor in pale lines. 2 hours earlier, I had been in surgery. The pregnancy had reached 14 weeks before the complications began. By early morning, the doctors told me there was nothing they could do. Dr. Melissa Grant explained it carefully, her voice calm and steady. She told me I needed at least 2 weeks of rest before returning to work. I remember nodding, even though I barely heard half of what she said. When she left the room, I sat alone in the recovery area. A television in the corner showed a morning news program with the sound turned low. The hosts were laughing about traffic and weather, as if nothing in the world had changed. My phone was still at the front desk with my bag. The nurse had asked me to leave it there while they monitored me after anesthesia. I did not feel like talking to anyone anyway. That was when Grant Mercer walked in. I noticed him first in the hallway. Tall, clean suit, moving with the confidence of someone who believed every room belonged to him. He spoke briefly to the receptionist and then stepped toward the recovery area. Grant was the son of Victoria Mercer, the woman my father married in 2013. At first, he had simply been a polite young man visiting during holidays. Later, he joined Whitaker Infrastructure after finishing business school. My father believed family deserved opportunities. Grant stopped in front of my chair. "Elena?" he said. I looked up at him, already tired. "How did you find me here?" "Family emergency contact," he said with a casual shrug. The receptionist said it was fine. He carried a thin leather folder. He placed it carefully on the table beside me. "I only need a few minutes. This is about Dad's estate." My chest tightened. 3 days ago we buried him, I said. "This can wait." Grant shook his head. "Actually, it can't." He opened the folder and slid a document toward me. The title sat clearly across the top of the page. Voluntary Relinquishment of Ownership Interest. My eyes moved slowly down the page. Whitaker Infrastructure, Equity Transfer, Permanent Waiver of Inheritance Rights. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. "What is this?" I asked. Grant folded his hands calmly. "It's a clean solution. Dad left some complicated ownership structures. This simplifies things." "You want me to give up my shares?" "I want the company to stay stable," he said. "Investors don't like uncertainty." I looked up at him. "You came to a medical clinic for this conversation. Timing matters in business." He tapped the paper lightly with one finger. "If you sign today, I will transfer $10,000 into your account as a goodwill payment." I stared at him. $10,000? For my father's company? "If you wait until tomorrow," he added, "it drops to 5. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Why would Dad leave something like this? Grant gave a small smile. "He didn't. I drafted it. But Dad knew you were never interested in running the business. He trusted me to handle things." That was not true. My father and I had disagreed about the company many times, but he never once suggested I should walk away from it. I closed the folder and pushed it back to him. I'm not signing anything without talking to a lawyer. Grant's expression hardened slightly. Elena, you don't want to drag this out. It will get messy. Then it gets messy, I said. For a moment, he said nothing. The polite expression on his face slowly disappeared. You always do this, he said quietly. Do what? Pretend you're stronger than you actually are. He leaned closer. Dad knew you couldn't handle the pressure. You design buildings. You don't run companies. That's not your decision. Actually, it is now. I shook my head. No, I'm not signing. The room felt very quiet. Grant glanced around briefly, an older woman reading a magazine, a nurse writing notes on a tablet. Then he looked back at me. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said, but it will be my mistake. The sound came before I fully realized what happened. A sharp crack echoed through the room. Grant's hand dropped back to his side. The woman with the magazine gasped. The nurse stood up immediately. My cheek burned. Grant spoke quietly, almost cold. You've always been weak, Elena. Security arrived quickly. The receptionist must have called them when the voices rose. 2 uniformed guards stepped between us. Sir, you need to leave. Grant straightened his jacket like nothing unusual had happened. Police officers arrived soon after and took statements. Dr. Melissa Grant returned and checked my face. She looked furious when she saw the mark. Grant was escorted out of the clinic. Later that afternoon, I learned he had already been released after posting bail. By then, I was driving toward Lake Norman. My father's house sat on a quiet road near the water. I had grown up there. Every corner held some memory. When I turned into the driveway, something felt wrong immediately. 3 large trash bags sat on the lawn near the front steps. I parked slowly and stepped out. The bags were open. Inside were my things: clothes from the closet upstairs, books I had left there after college, a wooden box filled with photographs of my mother who passed away in 2009. My throat tightened. I walked to the front door and tried the handle. Locked. A new brass lock had been installed. For a moment, I simply stood there staring at the door. This had been my home for 20 years, and now I could not even get inside. I knelt beside one of the bags and began pulling things out carefully. That's when I heard a voice from across the yard. Elena? I turned. Linda Patterson stood near her driveway holding a mug of coffee. She had lived next door since I was a teenager. She walked slowly toward me. Honey, are you all right? I nodded, even though I wasn't. Did Grant do this? Looks like it. Linda glanced toward the house. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, she said quietly. About what? She hesitated. About 2 weeks before your father passed, he came over to borrow a ladder. We talked for a bit. He mentioned something strange. What kind of strange? He said his heart medication tasted different. Bitter, he said, not like it usually did. I felt a tight pressure in my chest. Did he talk to his doctor? He said he would, but a few days later I noticed Grant coming and going more often, and Victoria started bringing him his pills every evening. Linda looked uneasy now. At the time, I thought maybe they were just helping him, but after seeing this today, I'm not so sure anymore. The wind moved quietly through the trees. The lake behind the house reflected the late afternoon sun. I gathered the photographs from the grass and placed them back into the wooden box. Thank you for telling me, I said. Menda touched my shoulder gently before walking back to her house. I sat in my car for a long time after that. The sky over Lake Norman slowly turned orange as the sun dropped toward the horizon. My father was gone. My child was gone, and the man who tried to force me out of my own family company had already changed the locks on my home. Linda's words kept repeating in my head. The medication tasted different. For the first time since my father's funeral, a thought formed clearly enough that I could not ignore it. Maybe my father did not die from a natural heart attack. Maybe someone had helped it happen? I started the engine. There was only one person I trusted enough to help me understand what was really happening. Margaret Lawson. Maggie had been my father's chief accountant for almost 30 years. If anyone knew what was happening inside Whitaker Infrastructure, it would be her.
Chapter 2. The First Cracks. I was buying time. The drive from Lake Norman to Charlotte took a little over 40 minutes that evening. Traffic was light, and the sky had already turned dark by the time I reached the quiet neighborhood where Margaret Lawson lived. My hands stayed tight around the steering wheel the entire way. Every red light felt longer than usual. I kept replaying the same thoughts again and again. The locks changed on my father's house, my belongings thrown onto the lawn, Grant appearing at a medical clinic hours after I lost a child, pushing papers across a table like it was a routine business transaction, and Linda's voice echoing in my head. The medication tasted different. By the time I turned onto Maggie's street, I knew I was no longer simply grieving my father. Something deeper had begun to move under the surface. Suspicion has a strange weight. Once it settles into your mind, it refuses to leave. Maggie's house was a small brick place near the edge of Charlotte, quiet and neatly kept. A soft light glowed through the kitchen window. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to gather my thoughts before knocking. When Maggie opened the door, she studied my face carefully. "Alina," she said quietly, "come inside." The warmth of the kitchen wrapped around me immediately. The smell of brewed coffee filled the room. Maggie motioned for me to sit at the small wooden table near the window. I had known Maggie most of my life. She had worked with my father for nearly 30 years. In our family, she was never just an employee. She was part of the foundation that kept everything running. She looked older than the last time I saw her, but her eyes were still sharp. "What happened?" she asked. I told her everything. I told her about the clinic, about Grant arriving with legal papers, about the slap that echoed across the waiting room. I told her about coming home to find my belongings dumped on the lawn and the locks changed. When I finished, Maggie did not react the way most people would. She did not look shocked. She looked tired. "I was afraid something like this would happen," she said quietly. My head lifted. "What do you mean?" She walked to the counter and brought her laptop to the table. The device looked old, but carefully maintained. "For the past 2 years, I have been reviewing some of the company reports Daniel asked me to watch quietly after I retired," she said, "just in case." She opened a spreadsheet filled with numbers. At first glance, it looked like ordinary financial data: expenses, contractor payments, project budgets. Then Maggie pointed to several lines that repeated over and over again. "Look at these transfers." The names of the companies meant nothing to me. Blue Ridge Industrial Services, Carolina Equipment Holdings, East Harbor Supply. I frowned. "We do not work with any of these companies." "Exactly," Maggie said. She clicked through several folders. Over the last 3 years, Whitaker Infrastructure has been sending regular payments to them, small amounts each time. 20,000 here, 15,000 there, nothing large enough to attract attention. My stomach tightened. "How much?" Maggie leaned back slightly. "Close to $800,000. That money did not buy equipment or materials," she continued. "There are no invoices tied to actual projects." "What are they then?" "Shell companies." I stared at the screen. "Meaning someone created them just to move money?" "Yes." "And you think that someone is Grant?" Maggie did not answer immediately. She simply closed the laptop halfway and folded her hands. "Your father started asking questions about some financial inconsistencies last year," she said quietly. "He never accused Grant directly, but he asked me to keep an eye on certain accounts." My chest felt tight. Why did he not tell me? He did not want to create a conflict unless he had proof. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on Maggie's wall ticked steadily. My phone buzzed on the table. The name on the screen was Tom Alvarez. I answered immediately.
Tom's voice sounded tense. "Elena, I am glad you picked up. What's going on?" "There's something you need to know. Grant has been meeting with investors from Florida this week." "Investors for what?" "He's trying to sell the company." My hand tightened around the phone. "He cannot do that." "He says he can if he controls the majority of the shares." Tom lowered his voice. "There's more. Some of the guys in accounting noticed the employee retirement fund is smaller than it should be." "How much smaller?" "No one knows yet, but the numbers do not match what we expected." My heart sank. More than 100 employees depended on that fund. These were men and women who had worked with my father for decades. If Grant had touched that money, the damage would go far beyond our family. After the call ended, Maggie watched me quietly. "The problem just got bigger," I said. She nodded. Yes, it did. The next afternoon, Maggie arranged a meeting with Eric Dalton, a corporate attorney who had worked with my father for many years. Eric's office overlooked downtown Charlotte. Glass walls, dark wood furniture, shelves of legal books that looked rarely touched. Eric listened carefully as Maggie explained what we found. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "There's something you should know," he said. "In 2022, Daniel asked me to create a protective trust connected to the company's shares." I felt a small spark of confusion. "A trust?" "Yes. It activates if there is evidence of fraud or a dispute over inheritance rights. It prevents a forced sale of the company until a full legal review is completed." My father planned for this. Eric nodded slowly. "He told me he was beginning to worry about certain financial decisions Grant was making. He wanted a safety mechanism. That meant my father had suspected something before he died." The thought made my chest tighten again. Maggie leaned forward slightly. "If the medication dosage changed, the hospital might have noticed." Eric nodded. "You have the right to request medical records as next of kin. If there was a toxicology panel performed during the emergency treatment, it would be in the file." The possibility felt heavy in the air. Later that evening, Maggie helped prepare the paperwork requesting the hospital report. A few days passed while we waited. During that time, the feeling that something was wrong continued to grow. Tom called again with small updates from the company. Grant had been spending more time in closed meetings. Several employees were worried about layoffs. Meanwhile, Maggie quietly reviewed the financial data. 3 days later, my phone rang early in the morning. It was Maggie. Her voice sounded different. "Elena, I just received the hospital report." I drove to her house immediately. The same kitchen table waited under the morning light. Maggie placed a folder in front of me. Inside was a copy of the medical report from the hospital where my father had been taken the night he died. Several pages described the emergency treatment. Then Maggie pointed to a section near the end, the toxicology screening. I looked at the numbers without understanding them at first. Maggie spoke quietly. "Your father was prescribed a low-dose heart medication called digoxin. It helps regulate heart rhythm." I nodded slowly. "But according to this report," she continued, "the level of digoxin in his blood when he arrived at the hospital was significantly higher than expected." My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means he had more of the drug in his system than his prescription required. The room felt very still. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Maggie closed the folder gently. "It doesn't prove anything by itself," she said, "but it raises a serious question." I stared at the numbers on the page. The medication tasted different. A cold realization began forming inside me. If my father had taken more digoxin than prescribed, there were only 2 possibilities. Either he accidentally took the wrong dose, or someone made sure he did. I looked up at Maggie, and for the first time since this started, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt the beginning of a very clear suspicion.
Chapter 3. The Poison Trail. The suspicion did not fade after that morning. It settled deeper. For the rest of the week, I moved through my days with a strange clarity, as if my mind had quietly shifted into a different mode. Grief was still there, heavy and constant, but now it was joined by something sharper. Questions. Too many questions. Maggie continued reviewing the financial records, while I tried to piece together the last few months of my father's life. I spoke with Tom again. I reviewed emails I still had access to. I went through old messages on my phone. Every small detail began to matter. Then, 1 week later, Maggie called me just after sunrise. Her voice sounded steady but urgent. "Elena, I need you to come over." "Did you find something?" "Yes, and you need to see it yourself." I was already dressed before the call ended. The morning air in Charlotte was cool when I stepped outside. The streets were quiet, and the sky was pale with early light. The drive to Maggie's house felt shorter than usual. When she opened the door, she was already holding a folder. We sat at the same kitchen table where we had studied the financial records days earlier. The coffee maker hummed softly in the background. Maggie placed the folder in front of me. This came from the hospital records we requested. I opened it slowly. Several pages of medical notes appeared first. Blood pressure readings, emergency treatment details, medication logs. Then Maggie turned to a specific page. This is the toxicology section. I studied the numbers again. I recognized the name of the drug immediately. Digoxin. My father had been taking it for years. "It regulates heart rhythm," Maggie said quietly. "Doctors often prescribe it for certain cardiac conditions." "I know. But the amount in Daniel's bloodstream when he arrived at the hospital was far higher than the dosage he was prescribed." The words settled slowly. "So he took too much." "Either that," Maggie said, "or someone increased the dose." The room felt very still. Outside, a bird landed briefly on the fence and flew away again. I ran a hand through my hair. Could the hospital have made a mistake? "It's possible," Maggie said carefully, "but unlikely. They test for digoxin levels specifically when someone dies from sudden cardiac complications. So they would have noticed." "Exactly." I looked down again at the page. The numbers did not accuse anyone, they simply existed. But they opened a door that could not easily be closed. Maggie closed the folder. "This alone does not prove anything," she said. "But if we combine it with everything else, it changes the picture." She opened her laptop again. "We need to reconstruct Daniel's last months." Over the next hour, we began doing exactly that. Calendar entries, company emails, security logs from the office, notes from Tom about when Grant had started making more financial decisions. One detail appeared again and again. Grant had moved into my father's house 6 months before he died. At the time, it seemed reasonable. My father had been working long hours, and Grant said he wanted to help manage things more closely. Now it felt different. "Who handled Daniel's medication?" Maggie asked. "Victoria," I said immediately. I remembered it clearly. Victoria had always insisted she was the organized one in the household. She kept track of doctor appointments, prescriptions, meal schedules. Every evening, she brought my father his pills with a glass of water. Maggie typed something into the laptop. Then she opened the company email archive. Because my father had used almost everything, many personal messages passed through the system as well. We began scanning through months of correspondence. Most of it was normal. Project updates, contractor discussions, budget reports. Then Maggie stopped scrolling. There. I leaned closer. An email thread between Grant and Victoria. The subject line mentioned medication refills. Grant had written a short message late one evening. "Make sure he takes the full dose tonight." Victoria had replied with a single line. "Already handled." I felt a chill move through my chest. It was not proof. It could easily be explained. But in the new context, it felt wrong. "Why would Grant send that?" I asked quietly. Maggie shook her head. "I don't know.
but it tells us he was involved in the conversation. We sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Maggie spoke again. Elena, there's another direction we should look. What? Victoria. The name hung in the air. Until that moment, most of my anger had focused on Grant, but Maggie was thinking further. I spent the next 2 days researching Victoria Mercer. At first, it seemed like ordinary background work. Public records, property transactions, marriage licenses. Then patterns appeared. Victoria had been married 4 times before she met my father. The first marriage ended in divorce. The second husband died 8 years later from heart complications. The third husband also died after a short illness. Both men left significant assets behind, and Victoria inherited a large portion of each estate. When I printed the records and brought them to Maggie, she studied them slowly. 2 husbands dying from heart conditions, she said quietly. Now Daniel. You think it means something? I think it means we should keep asking questions. Later that afternoon, Maggie arranged a meeting with Detective Aaron Cole. Cole worked in the Financial Crimes Division, but he had already shown interest in the irregular company transactions. We met him at a small conference room inside the Charlotte Police Building. He listened carefully while Maggie explained the financial transfers. Then I showed him the hospital toxicology report and the public records on Victoria's previous marriages. Cole leaned back in his chair. None of this proves murder, he said. I know, I replied, but it does raise enough questions that we can expand the investigation if stronger evidence appears. What kind of evidence? A clear financial motive, medical tampering, or a direct statement connecting someone to the act. Maggie glanced at me. We're working on the financial part already. Cole nodded. If the fraud case develops further, it gives us leverage. Financial crimes often expose other things. The meeting ended with cautious optimism. We had not proven anything yet, but the path forward was becoming clearer. 2 nights later, something happened that made everything feel more real. It was close to midnight when Maggie called. Her voice sounded shaken. Elena, someone just broke my window. I grabbed my keys immediately. The streets were almost empty as I drove across town. When I reached Maggie's house, a police cruiser was already parked outside. Blue lights flashed silently against the brick walls. Maggie stood near the front porch, wrapped in a blanket. What happened? I asked. She pointed toward the living room window. The glass had shattered inward, pieces lay scattered across the carpet. An officer finished taking notes and stepped outside. No sign of anyone nearby, but we found this inside. He handed Maggie a folded piece of paper. She opened it slowly. 3 words written in thick black marker. Stop digging. My stomach dropped. Maggie looked at me. They know. Detective Cole arrived a few minutes later. He examined the broken window and the note carefully. This is intimidation, he said. You think it was Grant? I asked. It could be him. It could also be someone acting for him. Cole folded the note and placed it into an evidence bag. But here's the important part, he continued. People only threaten investigators when they're afraid of what might be found. Maggie looked tired but determined. So we're getting close. Cole nodded slightly. Possibly. After the police left, we sat in Maggie's kitchen again. The broken window had been temporarily covered with plywood. The house felt different now. Quieter. Tenser. What do we do next? I asked. Maggie stared at the table for a long moment. Evidence, she said finally. We need something stronger than financial transfers and suspicious emails. What kind of evidence? Something that ties Grant directly to what happened. I leaned back in the chair. And how do we get that? Maggie looked up at me. There's only one reliable way. She paused before continuing. We make him talk. The idea felt dangerous. Grant was careful, calculated, but Maggie had spent decades studying the way people behaved around money and power. If Grant believes he has already won, he may say more than he should. I understood what she meant. A trap, something quiet, something controlled, a conversation where he thought he was still in charge. Outside, the night wind moved softly through the trees. Maggie closed her laptop. We need to arrange a meeting. And for the first time since all of this began, the next step was clear.
Chapter 4: The Trap. The plan felt simple when Maggie said it out loud, but nothing about it felt simple in my body. For the rest of that day, I moved through small routines like someone acting in a quiet play. I answered a few emails from work, returned a message from Dr. Melissa Grant's office, and tried to eat dinner even though I had no appetite. Beneath every normal moment was the same thought. We make him talk. That evening, Maggie called. "We do this carefully," she said. "I know. No improvising. Grant will try to push you emotionally. I can handle him." Maggie was silent for a moment. "You handled him in that clinic until he hit you. This is different." She was right, and we both knew it. The next morning, we met Detective Aaron Cole again at the Charlotte Police Building. This time, the meeting felt more serious. Cole had 2 thick folders on the table. "I spoke with the district attorney," he said. "If Grant admits anything about the company finances, we move immediately on the fraud case. If he says something connected to Daniel's medication, that opens a much larger investigation." Maggie nodded slowly. "We want him comfortable enough to talk." Cole looked directly at me. "Which means you need to look like you're giving up." "I already think he's weak," I said. "Good. Use that." He opened one of the folders. "We're preparing a warrant connected to financial records, computers, and company emails. The warrant becomes active once we have enough probable cause from the meeting. That means what he says matters." I nodded. "And the recording." "Legal and documented," Cole said. "North Carolina allows one-party consent recordings, but we are doing this clean. No shortcuts." When the meeting ended, I stepped outside and realized my hands were shaking. Maggie noticed. "We don't have to do this if you're not ready." "I am," I said. "I just need to know what to say." That afternoon, we practiced in Maggie's kitchen. "Start with agreeing," she said. "Let him believe you're walking away." "And the financial records. You ask to see them. Tell him you want to understand what you're leaving behind." "What if he pushes me to sign immediately?" "Then you insist on meeting in person at the office. He'll like controlling the setting." Maggie paused before adding one more thing. "Do not bring up digoxin immediately. Let him settle first." That night, sleep came in short pieces. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father sitting behind his desk at Whitaker Infrastructure, reviewing contracts with his reading glasses low on his nose. He had built that company from nothing. Grant had tried to buy me out for $10,000. The next morning, I called him. Grant answered quickly. "Elena?" "I've been thinking," I said. "I don't want the situation getting worse." He let out a small laugh. "Smart decision." "I'll sign the document," I said, "but I want to review the financials first." There was a brief pause. "You want to audit me?" "I want closure," I replied. Another pause followed, longer this time. Finally, Grant said, "Come to the office tomorrow, 10 in the morning, conference room upstairs." "Victoria will be there?" "Of course," he said. "This concerns the family." After the call ended, I drove straight to Maggie's house. "It's happening," I said. Maggie nodded. "You're going to feel like you're walking into a trap." "I know." She squeezed my hand gently. "We are the trap." That evening, Detective Cole called with final instructions. "2 officers will be inside the building posing as security," he said. "Another team will be nearby. You focus only on Grant." "What if he refuses to talk?" "He won't," Cole said calmly. "Men like him always believe they're the smartest person in the room." The next morning, I arrived at Whitaker Infrastructure early. The building looked exactly the same as it always had.
Glass entrance, gray stone walls, the company name engraved beside the doors. But the feeling inside was different. Employees walked through the lobby quietly. Some glanced at me with uncertainty, as if they didn't know whether I still belonged there. Tom Alvarez met me near the entrance. "Elena," he said quietly. "Tom, you okay doing this?" "I have to." Tom lowered his voice. "People are nervous. Grant's been meeting with investors. No one knows what's happening." "It's their company, too," I said. Tom nodded grimly. "Your dad would be furious." "I know." I walked upstairs to the conference room. Grant sat at the head of the table. Victoria sat beside him, wearing a cream blouse and pearl earrings, calm and composed as always. When she saw me, she offered a polite smile. "Elena, I'm sorry things have become so difficult." Grant leaned back in his chair. "Sit." I took the chair across from him. A folder waited in front of me. Grant pushed it forward. "Sign and we move on." "I said I want to review the financials first." Grant sighed dramatically. "You're in no position to negotiate." Victoria placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Let her look," she said softly. "It will help her accept things." Grant slid several printed reports across the table. 5 minutes. I scanned the pages slowly. Profit reports, vendor payments, expense lists. I pointed to a section. These companies, Blue Ridge Industrial Services, Carolina Equipment Holdings, East Harbor Supply, what are they? Grant's eyes narrowed. Vendors. "You left the company years ago. You don't understand how things run now." Victoria smiled faintly. "Grant has modernized the business." I let the silence stretch. Grant shifted impatiently. "You've seen enough. Sign." I turned another page. "I also saw the hospital report," I said quietly. Grant's expression changed slightly. "What report?" "The toxicology report from the night my father died." Victoria's posture stiffened. I kept my voice steady. "His digoxin level was much higher than the dosage prescribed." Grant scoffed. "He had heart problems. He probably took the wrong pill." "He didn't manage his medication," I said. "Victoria did." Victoria's smile stayed in place. "I helped him stay organized." I nodded slowly. "Then maybe you can explain the email where Grant told you to make sure he took the full dose." Grant leaned back in his chair, irritation creeping into his voice. "You're digging through emails now? That's pathetic." "I'm asking a question." Grant's patience snapped. "Fine. He skipped medication sometimes. We wanted to keep him stable." "And he died anyway." Grant shrugged. "Everyone dies, Elena. Your father was going to die sooner or later." The words landed hard in the quiet room. I waited a moment before speaking again. "All right," I said softly. "I'll sign." Grant smiled. "Finally." Then I added calmly, "But you should know this meeting is being recorded." Grant froze. "What did you say?" "Detective Aaron Cole is investigating the financial transfers. I consented to the recording." Grant shoved his chair back violently. "You set me up." Victoria's calm expression finally cracked. "Elena, what are you doing?" I stayed seated, listening. The conference room door opened. Detective Aaron Cole stepped inside, with 2 investigators behind him. They carried folders and official paperwork. Cole's voice was steady. "Grant Mercer, we have a warrant for company financial records and electronic devices. Please remain where you are." Grant stared at me like he could not believe what just happened. For the first time since my father died, the balance in that room had completely shifted.
Chapter 5. The Fall. Grant Mercer's confidence collapsed faster than I expected. One moment he had been leaning across the conference table, speaking like he owned the room.
The next moment, Detective Aaron Cole was standing in the doorway holding a signed warrant. Grant looked from Cole to the investigators behind him and then back at me. His voice came out tight. "You can't do this." Cole walked into the room slowly. "We already did." One of the investigators stepped toward the table and placed a document in front of Grant. "Mr. Mercer, this warrant authorizes the seizure of company financial records, electronic devices, and communications tied to Whitaker infrastructure." Grant pushed the chair back even farther and stood up. "This is ridiculous. You don't have anything." Victoria's face had lost the smooth calm she had worn only seconds earlier. Her eyes moved quickly between Cole and the paperwork on the table. Cole's voice stayed even. "Both of you need to remain in the room while we secure the evidence." Grant turned toward me again. "You planned this." I met his stare. "You planned a lot of things too." Two uniformed officers entered the conference room a moment later. They positioned themselves near the door while the investigators began collecting the laptops and folders scattered across the table. Grant tried one last time. "This is a misunderstanding. We were discussing internal business matters." Cole did not look up from the warrant. "We'll sort that out during the investigation." Victoria finally spoke again. Her voice was controlled, but thinner than before. "This is harassment. My husband died of natural causes." Cole looked at her briefly. "The medical examiner and the financial records will help clarify that." For the next 20 minutes, the conference room filled with quiet movement. Computers were unplugged, phones were placed into evidence bags. Several employees watched from the hallway with confused expressions. Grant's anger grew more visible as the minutes passed. "You're making a mistake," he said to Cole. "You're letting her manipulate you." Cole ignored him. When the last device had been collected, the officer nearest the door stepped forward. "Grant Mercer, please turn around." Grant stared at him. "For what?" "For the purposes of this investigation." Grant hesitated long enough that the silence became uncomfortable. Then he slowly turned around. The sound of handcuffs closing was small but final. Victoria remained seated for a moment longer. Her eyes moved around the room as if she was searching for a way out that no longer existed. Cole looked at her calmly. "Victoria Mercer, we need you to come with us as well." She stood slowly. "This is outrageous." No one responded. I stayed in my chair while they escorted both of them out of the room. Grant looked back once as he passed the doorway. The expression on his face had changed from anger to something closer to disbelief, as if he had never truly imagined this ending. The hallway outside filled with whispers as employees watched the scene unfold. Tom Alvarez stood near the elevators. When Grant disappeared down the corridor, Tom met my eyes and gave a small nod. The investigation moved quickly after that day. Once the warrant was executed, the financial evidence began to fall into place. The shell companies Maggie had discovered were traced through multiple accounts until the transfers led directly to Grant's personal banking records. Nearly $800,000 had been siphoned out of Whitaker infrastructure over 3 years. The employee retirement fund had also been quietly drained. That discovery hit the company hardest. Many of the workers had trusted my father for decades. The idea that their future savings had been treated like a private account by someone in management left people furious. Maggie worked closely with the investigators, helping them untangle the financial web Grant had built. Meanwhile, the medical questions surrounding my father's death continued. The toxicology report became one piece of a much larger puzzle. Investigators began reviewing prescription records, pharmacy logs, and medical notes from the months before his death. Emails between Grant and Victoria were pulled from company servers. Several of them mentioned medication schedules. None of it proved intent by itself, but together it built a timeline. Then, another discovery changed everything. Detectives obtained a search warrant for a small storage unit rented under Victoria's name in Raleigh. Inside, they found a locked metal box. The contents shocked even the investigators. Medical files. Not only my father's records, but documents connected to 3 of Victoria's previous husbands. Handwritten notes were tucked between the pages. Dates, medication names, dosage adjustments. A quiet record of patterns that had never been questioned before. When Maggie told me about the discovery, she spoke carefully. She said, "They believe it shows preparation." The prosecutors began assembling the case. Grant was charged with financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy related to the company funds. Victoria faced additional charges connected to homicide and fraud. The legal process moved slowly after that. Months passed filled with court hearings, document reviews, and statements from employees who had witnessed the changes inside the company during the last year of my father's life. Whitaker Infrastructure was placed under temporary court supervision to protect the remaining assets and restore the employee retirement accounts. Maggie helped guide the financial recovery while the company board stabilized operations. For the first time since my father's death, the business began to feel steady again. 3 months after the arrests, I returned to the office on a quiet Friday afternoon. The building felt different. Not lighter exactly, but calmer. I walked through the familiar hallways and stopped outside the office my father had used for years. The door was open. Inside, the desk was exactly where he had left it. The same framed photographs sat on the corner. One of them showed the company's first construction crew standing beside a small bridge project almost 20 years earlier. Tom knocked softly on the doorframe. "Mind if I come in?" "Of course." He stepped inside and looked around the room. "Feels strange without him here." "It does." Tom glanced toward the large window overlooking the yard behind the building. Several crews were loading equipment into trucks for an afternoon project. People were worried the company wouldn't survive all this. They deserved better than what happened. Tom nodded. They got it. After he left, I stood at the window alone. The yard below was full of movement. Workers walking between vehicles, engines starting, a crane lifting steel beams onto a trailer. Life continuing. Whitaker Infrastructure was still here. My father's work had not disappeared, and the people who tried to take it had finally been forced to face the consequences. I rested my hand on the back of the chair he had used for so many years. For a long time, I believed the hardest part of losing him was the silence that followed. But standing there, I realized something else. The truth finds its way to the surface, even when people try very hard to bury it. If you have ever watched someone betray their own family for money or power, then you understand why this story isn't really about inheritance. It is about the moment when the truth stops hiding. And if you have ever faced something like this in your own life, I would genuinely like to hear your story too. Tell me what you would have done in my place. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stay with the channel. There are many more lessons hidden inside the choices people make when they believe no one is watching.